Mysteries await just a page away. Ready to dive in? Welcome to The Book Reader, where stories unfold one enchanting page at a time. Subscribe now and unlock the magic.
Richard Branson. Losing My Virginity, the Autobiography. Chapter 1. The restructuring of Virgin Atlantic after the tragedy of September 11th really began to pay off in the years that followed, and the confidence of the management was if anything enhanced by the ability of the airline to withstand the shocks that followed, the aftereffects of the war in Afghanistan, and the double whammy, the following year of SARS in Asia, and a second war in the Gulf. Virgin Atlantic truly came of age during these events, and managed to return to profitability after April 2002, despite having lost nearly £100 million in the months that followed the Twin Towers tragedy. We also launched our secret weapon in the so-called Battle of the Beds with British Airways. In the summer of 2003, Virgin Atlantic unveiled its upper-class suite, which is the world's only first-class style truly flat bed in a business class. It took off in every sense of the word, and the summer of 2004 we were making significant inroads into our rivals' market share. The project to create the beds had the usual Virgin characteristics. We took the brave move to design the unique product ourselves, and the task fell to Joe Ferry, Virgin Atlantic's head of design. He achieved the holy grail of airline seat manufacturers, which is to make a comfortable seat into a genuine bed through its unique flipping mechanism. The risk paid off, and Joe's design won 6 of the world's biggest industrial design awards during 2004, and had the effect of moving thousands of British Airways regular travelers to Virgin Atlantic. As Virgin Atlantic continued to recover, I felt a great deal of unease about the War on Terror. It had long been the desire of the so-called neoconservatives in America to conduct a more interventionist role in the Middle East to stabilize that region. By the autumn of 2002, it was clear that the Bush administration had taken a decision to intervene in Iraq regardless of what world opinion thought of the matter, and, by early 2003, it was clear they would do it even if the UN did not back their decision. I found the whole episode deeply depressing, and had a real foreboding about what I believe was an unjustified invasion. Apart from the obvious human cost of a conflict, I was skeptical about the weapons of mass destruction, and could not fathom why the U.S. government would possibly find Iraq so easy to democratize when so many others had failed before. George Bush continued to state on television and at press conferences that war was a necessary evil. It is my belief that most necessary evils are far more evil than necessary. Though after September 11th, Will Whitehorn had counseled us against public opposition to the Bush administration over the issue of Iraq on the basis that it was inevitable. By February 2003, I'd hatched a personal plan to try and persuade Saddam Hussein to stand down before the dogs of war were unleashed. With a heavy heart, I called Nelson Mandela and followed this with this simple letter. Dear Madiba, as always, it was very good to talk to you. I thought I'd send you a very brief note setting out our discussion. America and Britain have definitely decided to go to war. Inevitably, there will be many civilian casualties. I believe there may be only one way to stop a war in Iraq, and I believe you may be the only person in the world to achieve it. If Saddam Hussein could be persuaded to retire to Libya with full immunity, I do not believe it would be possible for America to press ahead with war. If he were to make this sacrifice to avoid his people going through yet more suffering, he would enhance his reputation considerably. The personal alternative will be the fate of Noriega, Milosevic, or worse. Knowing your close relationship with President Gaddafi and the respect you are held in Iraq, you are perhaps the only person who could organize this. I believe that you would have the credibility to persuade Saddam Hussein to step down. By flying out with you, to say Libya, he could leave with his head held high. It would be the best thing he could ever do for his people. If it helps you, I would be happy to send you a plane to take you there and back. I'll talk to you once you've spoken with Thabo. Kind regards as always, Richard. It was a bold plan that might just have worked. But time was running out. Nelson Mandela wanted me to get the approval of Kofi Annan, the United Nations Secretary General, and the blessing of his own President Thabo Mbeki. I wrote to Kofi Annan and followed up with a phone call. He gave the idea his full support. On March 17th, we positioned 2 pilots and a Learjet in Johannesburg to take Mandela to Baghdad. We had managed to get the hostages out of Iraq some years before by sending Edward Heath. This time Nelson Mandela, the world's most respected person, had spoken out strongly against the upcoming U.S. invasion. If anybody could persuade Saddam, it would be him. Enormous numbers of lives could be saved and injuries avoided. Sadly, time ran out, and 2 days later events overtook us. On March 19, 2003, the U.S. bombed Baghdad, and the rest is history. There is nothing in my life that I regret more. But what I realized from this experience, and from friends with vision, like Peter Gabriel, is that the world needed a group of elders, such as Nelson Mandela, who could step in on behalf of the world community in situations like this. I decided that, over the next couple of years, I wanted to help bring together a group of individuals who could serve as global elders to deliver a voice to the people of the world. In late 2003, Joan, Holly, I and some of the team from Virgin also had the wonderful opportunity to attend and help organize Madiba's 46,664 concert in South Africa. Madiba was generous enough to use his prison number, 46664, as a symbol for hope in the fight against HIV/AIDS. Sitting next to him and his wonderful wife, while listening to Peter Gabriel sing Biko, for the first time in South Africa, was one of the most moving experiences of my life. Before this concert, but not long after the war was over, I saw a microcosm of Iraq firsthand when we took the first relief flight into Basra. Appropriately, it was piloted by Mike Abunallah, an Iraqi exile whose family had fled Iraq 22 years earlier. Our mission was to deliver over 60 tons of generously donated medical supplies to the hospitals of Basra, which Saddam's army had stripped bare in their rush northwards. During the flight, we were all struck by the devastation of any infrastructure on the ground and the sheer emptiness and enormity of the country. The whole project had been a remarkable cooperation between an Iraqi exile, Louis Shakarki, who was based in the Midlands in Birmingham, our own Jackie McQuillan, and Air Marshal Brian Borich. The spirit of cooperation between the British forces on the ground in Basra and a small team of operational staff from Virgin Atlantic was remarkable. In a matter of weeks, they managed to open Basra Airport for a 747, getting this much-needed aid into the country. I spent a lot of time talking to the servicemen and women in Basra, and I could tell that many of the British forces had a strong sense of foreboding regarding the situation unfolding with their American counterparts in the north of the country. How true that sense of foreboding turned out to be. Many of us were moved by what we saw and experienced during this first civilian flight into Iraq since 1990. Not least Jackie, who, joined by 3 Iraqi exiles who are now doctors in Britain, went downtown to visit some of the patients in Basra General Hospital. It was there she saw firsthand not only the pain and suffering inflicted on civilians during war, but also the fact that there is always hope and beauty, no matter how horrific the situation. In the hospital, she met a young woman of 20 who had been severely wounded in the legs and stomach by shrapnel. Despite her agony, she could not drag her eyes away from her beautiful little baby girl, who had been born by emergency cesarean section 2 days before. Seeing Jackie's tears of sympathy, the woman said, "Please don't cry for me. God has given me the greatest gift of all, and in her eyes is only innocence and love." They were some of the most poignant words relayed to me that day. The Pentagon suggested that the cost of the conflict in Iraq would be approximately $75 billion per year over 10 years. In accepting the Nawano Peace Prize on May 8, 2003, Dr. Priscilla Elworthy, of the Oxford Research Group, said, "We must compare this $75 billion to the costs of building international security in other ways." In the year 2000, world leaders estimated that it would require $25 billion to $35 billion annually to raise levels of health and welfare in Africa to Western standards. UNESCO estimate that all the world's children could be educated if we were to spend $7 billion per year for 10 years. Clear water and sanitation could be provided for everyone in the world for $9 billion annually. HIV and AIDS now claim 5,500 lives a day around the world, more than the Black Death, and 12 million children in Africa have been orphaned by the disease. Kofi Annan has called for $10 billion annually to address the AIDS epidemic. So all these goals could be reached. All this suffering prevented worldwide for less than the United States spends on military action in Iraq. However, she ended on a positive note by quoting Dr. Muller, the Chancellor of the University of Peace in Costa Rica, and the Dalai Lama. Dr. Muller, in a speech earlier this year, said, "I'm so honored to be alive at such a miraculous time in history. I'm so moved by what's going on in our world today. Never before in the history of the world has there been a global, visible, public, viable, open dialogue and conversation about the very legitimacy of war. What will be the consequences? The costs? What might be the peaceful alternatives? What kind of negotiations are we not thinking of? What are the real intentions of declaring war?" Many millions of people in the world seem to have found a new voice. Maybe some good may emerge from the decision to invade Iraq after all. And finally, the beautiful quotation purportedly from the Dalai Lama, "If you wish to experience peace, provide peace for another. If you wish to know that you are safe, cause others to know that they are safe. If you wish to better understand seemingly incomprehensible things, help another to better understand. If you wish to heal your own sadness or anger, seek to heal the sadness or anger of another. Those others are watching for you now. They are looking to you for guidance, for help, for courage, for strength, for understanding and for assurance at this hour. Most of all, they are looking to you for love." Back in London in the spring of 2004, it was business as usual in the Virgin Empire. Gordon McCallum, previously Group Strategy Director for the Virgin Group, was busy preparing Virgin Mobile for its flotation on the London stock market, with an expected valuation of £1 billion. It really had been a remarkable story. In only 4 years, we had created the world's first virtual mobile phone network and established a base of 4 million customers who were the most satisfied in the industry. Even more exciting, in some ways, was the huge success of the U.S. mobile venture, which we had started in the dark days of post-11 September America. Even by 2004, it was clear that Virgin Mobile USA could eventually be more valuable than the UK operation. It had become the fastest-growing company in the history of corporate America to reach $1 billion, and had done so in under 3 years. Hot on the heels of the U.S., other colleagues, Robert Samuelson and Max Kelly, were beavering away in Canada recruiting the team for yet another mobile venture to launch there in 2005 in partnership with Bell Canada. By mid-2004, it was becoming obvious that the model really worked, and we could provide a better deal for consumers through leveraging our brand off other networks' excess capacity. As the year drew on, more and more opportunities began to pop up in places as diverse as Africa and China. In July of that year, Virgin Mobile UK floated on the stock market. In the 5 years since the company had started, it had become a major force in the UK mobile industry, gathering over 4 million customers, and becoming one of the most profitable companies in the industry based on its simple and cheap virtual network model. As usual, our timing was impeccable. The stock market was the worst it had been since September 11th, and flotations were getting pulled on a daily basis on both sides of the Atlantic. To add insult to injury, the only other company floating on the stock market in Britain at the time was the manufacturer of Branston's pickle, so it won't take much for you to imagine the headlines that accompanied our dilemma on whether or not to float Virgin Mobile. I was on holiday on Necker when we took the final decision to go ahead at a reduced price of £2 per share. The psychology was very important to us in that the Virgin Group had once been quoted on the stock market in Britain, and we had always said that, if we came back, it would be with a single company focused on a particular business. I'm glad to say that in the winter of 2004, the Virgin Mobile shares went from strength to strength. This has resulted in a huge amount of interest in our U.S. mobile business, and proposals to float it, which we did in late 2007, with a share price of $15. 2005 was also the year that we began to take the mobile concept around the world on the back of the success of the UK, Australia, and the USA. The first big new mobile launch was in Canada in the spring, with South Africa to follow in the winter, and deals being done for launches in China, India, and other parts of Africa. Not only had the successful flotation of Virgin Mobile allowed us to consider indulging in riskier projects such as space travel, but it also gave us the chance to try out 1 or 2 fun sponsorships of the type that Virgin had not been able to do since September 11th. Steve Fawcett's Virgin Atlantic Global Flyer was only one of these. In early 2005, we agreed to back a unique archaeological project to survey ancient Alexandria using the latest geophysical equipment, a georadar. Many important historical buildings, such as the tomb of Alexander the Great Library, and Ptolemaic Royal Palace, have lain hidden and undiscovered somewhere under the city of Alexandria since late Roman times, when an earthquake destroyed the whole area. It felt like old times for me as Martin Gregory, with whom I had become a friend since he had written his book about BA's dirty tricks, and another, Diana, The Last Days, on the death of my friend Princess Diana, presented the idea. He had credible research behind his belief that a group of young archaeologists could unmask the secrets that lie below the modern city using ground-penetrating radar. It would take until 2006 to find out whether he was right, and if we would be part of the greatest archaeological discovery of all time, or yet another forgotten sponsor of an ill-fated expedition to find one of the wonders of the ancient world. Despite September 11th, we did not ignore the airline industry, where it was clear there were still opportunities to create really exciting businesses. By the summer of 2004, Fred Reed, who used to run Delta Airlines, was recruited to lead one of Virgin's boldest moves in its 35-year history, an all-out assault on the bankrupt U.S. domestic air travel market. Because of the historic protectionism of the U.S. domestic market, I would have to play a relatively minor role in the creation of Virgin America as an airline, with the majority of the funding and the management coming from U.S. institutions and companies. It was therefore bizarre, but deeply satisfying, to wake up one morning in May 2004 to read that my new airline was going to be called Virgin America. For me, Virgin had come of age. We had the confidence to invest in the world's toughest aviation market and be prepared to not have full control of the company's destiny. The very rules that had made the U.S. such a barrier to entry to us in the past, and which BA had tried to use to seal a monopoly, no longer held any fear for us. Over the years we had witnessed some of the most anti-consumer and monopolistic practices by the big U.S. carriers. It finally appeared that the tables were turning, but for some the desire to keep the barriers up to new players within this underserved market is still great. In July 2004, I received a letter from a friend who had attended the ACTC Aviation Conference in Washington. In attendance at this event were the chief executive officers of the leading 5 American carriers. During the meeting, one of these gentlemen was heard to remark, "All we need now is Branson, and the cookies will get very burnt." This sounds vaguely familiar, if not flattering. However, it was not the new airline, but another unique aviation event that took me back to America during midsummer that year. On a cold morning on June 22, 2004, I was fortunate enough to witness one of the most amazing sights I have ever seen as the world's first privately funded spaceship streaked into the skies above the little town of Mojave in the Californian desert. Spaceship One was the truly remarkable brainchild of Burt Rutan, a friend I had known for many years. Burt is one of the world's true geniuses, and his designs for numerous aircraft had been groundbreaking for decades. He was already working with Steve Fawcett and me on the Virgin Atlantic Global Flyer, a unique and beautiful aircraft that we were planning for Steve to attempt the world's first nonstop solo flight. The aircraft looked amazing, but not as amazing as the little spaceship I had seen hidden in the hangar earlier that year, and was now streaking into space at 3,000 miles an hour above our heads in the desert. Another friend, Paul Allen, who is one of the founders of Microsoft, had funded Burt's vision of a cheap reusable spaceship for some years. Like Burt, Paul is a visionary. He was visibly excited as he watched his sci-fi dream unfold and become tomorrow's reality. Mike Melville, an incredibly brave pilot, took the little spacecraft to 328,000 feet above the Earth. I watched with awe and realized that our own vision of cheap space tourism might finally be becoming a real possibility. At dinner with Burt and Paul the night before, we had discussed the future of private space flight through a partnership with each other, and I left the evening feeling uplifted. I had always felt that the government monopoly on space was a danger to mankind rather than the benefit often touted by cynical politicians and self-serving missile manufacturers. Monopolies don't work in any industry, whether public or private. Here was a chance for Virgin to take on the final frontier. I'm sure you won't be surprised that we had registered both the trademark rights and a company for space travel 10 years earlier, to be called Virgin Galactic Airways. The Virgin Group, to infinity and beyond. You must be joking, people said to me. Okay, I responded, Virgin Intergalactic Airways. All in all, 2004 turned out to be a hugely important year for Virgin on every front. The Virgin Galactic joke became a very serious reality in September of that year. After months of intense negotiations, Paul Allen agreed to sell the rights to the technology, which had made Spaceship One, to Virgin Galactic, which was officially born as a company on September 15, 2004. Within 2 weeks, Spaceship One, carrying the Virgin banner, had completed 2 flights into space, the first ever repeated private space flights, winning Bert and Paul the X Prize, a $10 million aviation incentive prize designed to jumpstart the space tourism industry. The media went wild and Bert rightfully took his place as an all-American hero. It was one of the proudest moments of my life to stand with Paul and Bert on a cool, still desert morning in Mojave to watch the second flight successfully completed. There was something about that day that just made you realize that we were watching history unfold, and it reminded me of one of my favorite films of all time, The Right Stuff. It wasn't easy to persuade my level-headed colleagues at the Virgin Group of the sense in investing over $100 million in building a spaceship. In fact, amusingly, I intercepted an email between some of these level-headed colleagues by mistake, which said that I should be called Dr. Yes because I said yes to everything. By now, Stephen Murphy, who had worked for Virgin in the early 1990s and had since returned to work with us again, had become the nearest thing that we had to a real chief executive, and for the past 3 years, he had led a committee who scrutinized all of our investment decisions. When Will Whitehorn had to present them with the notion that I wanted to launch commercial space flights by 2008, they were just a little bit skeptical. Unless you have met Burt Rutan and understand his achievements, it would be hard for anyone to believe that a small group of buildings in the Mojave Desert could possibly manufacture and safely fly a cheap private spacecraft. But, as the deal to launch Virgin Galactic unfolded, so did the credibility of the project, and by the beginning of 2005, even my hard-headed bean counters began to accept that the project was viable. As readers of this book will know, I've often been accused of talking ahead of myself, but I do believe that in the near future, we will be taking the world's first private astronauts regularly into space both safely and for $200,000 or less each. The unique features of Bert's spaceships that give me so much confidence are the safety of both his rocket motor and his feathering device for re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere. In both cases, his genius has been to take very old ideas and apply modern technology to them. Let's start with his rocket motor. It is unique in that it burns laughing gas and rubber, by themselves both inert. Put them together, and you've got a perfectly credible rocket motor, which is also much safer than the highly combustible liquid-fueled rockets of NASA. One cynic did point out that, if anything ever happened up in space, at least we'd die laughing. The other feature turns the spaceship from a streamlined supersonic craft into the equivalent of a sycamore leaf or shuttlecock whilst in space. This allows the craft to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere much more slowly than a space shuttle would, which removes the risk of overheating. The final feature of Bert's design is his use of plastic and what are called composite materials. Neither the mothership that launches his spaceship nor the spaceship itself are built of metal, but instead use new heat-resistant materials that are lighter and safer than aluminum or steel. The net result is a spaceship launch mechanism that is safe, cheap and environmentally friendly. To have the same impact on the environment as one space shuttle launch would require many tens of thousands of launches by our spaceship. This means that the vision of millions of people, that they may one day be able to visit the stars, can finally be realized. However, this won't be true of Joan Branson, who has not volunteered for the first flight, despite the fact that both my mum and dad and Holly and Sam all want to go. I suppose I should hardly be surprised, as Joan still crushes my hand every time we fly anywhere together. My dad will be in his 90s when he flies. When asked whether he was worried about going into space, he responded by saying that, given his age, that was the least of his worries. If my confidence in Burt Rutan's unique status as the Einstein of aerodynamics needed any reinforcing, as we geared up to build the world's first truly commercial spaceship, it happened at the end of February 2005. When Steve Fawcett had approached me in 2002 to be his backup pilot in case of illness, I readily agreed, and was equally pleased to fund and manage the building and flying of the world's first high-altitude global circumnavigation aircraft. We could not have dreamed that 3 years later the project would also have produced one of the most extraordinarily beautiful aircraft ever built, the Virgin Atlantic Global Flyer. It was Steve's ambition to fly it solo around the world in less than 80 hours, using a combination of one of the most efficient aircraft designs ever built and Burt Rutan's legendary ability to build large composite aircraft not containing any metal. It was a freezing evening on Monday, February 28, when Steve Fawcett took off from Salina, Kansas, to attempt his heroic flight. The aircraft looked magnificent as it trundled down the runway, with 18,000 pounds of fuel on board out of a total weight of little over 21,000 pounds. Thousands watched the takeoff, and all of our hearts were in our mouths for 10 seconds when, having lifted off, Steve drifted back down towards the runway. But, before the fatal moment that we all saw in our mind's eye, he swooped away like a beautiful swallow into the night skies of the Midwest. I followed him up for the first few hours in the chase plane, and was due to be dropped in Toronto by Will and the team in order that I could launch Virgin Mobile the next day in Canada. As we headed into a freezing blizzard, it was clear that all was not well with the plane. In the climb out from Kansas, Steve had definitely lost some fuel, and there seemed to be a problem with his GPS system as he crossed the Canadian border. I was unceremoniously dumped on the tarmac by the chase plane team, and left to head into Toronto, not knowing if Steve was going to make it. But like most things at Scaled Composites, every contingency had been thought of, and over the next 24 hours John Carco, Bert's brilliant aircraft designer, crunched the numbers and came to the conclusion that if the jet stream winds remained strong around the Earth, then Steve could still make it. For 67 hours Steve battled with the elements and at one point flew as high as 49,000 feet above the Earth in order to try and catch the best fuel efficiency and winds. Having left Kansas in freezing, wintry conditions on the Monday night, he arrived back at the same airport, having not slept or landed anywhere on the planet's surface, to the beautiful sunshine of a spring day. It was one of the happiest moments I've ever had, and, even though I hadn't participated in the attempt directly, I felt not only proud of Steve, but also a strange comradeship with his achievement. The type you can only feel if you've been there once before with him. There was no doubt about the importance of his achievement. For Steve it was a world record, but, as importantly for a major international airline, we had proved the point that you could build a light, highly efficient aircraft with no metal in its fuselage or wings and achieve sustained high-altitude flight. The global flyer used less fuel per hour than an American four-wheel drive truck. If the lessons of this flight could be transferred to civil aviation and become integral to the cultures of Boeing and Airbus, commercial flying could finally become the most environmentally friendly way to carry large numbers of people around the planet. The future of the airline industry around the world also took a leap into the dark in January of 2005, on a cold, clear winter's morning in Toulouse. It takes something really special to bring a British Prime Minister and a French President together in the same place, since relations between the two countries haven't exactly been their best once the war on terrorism began. But that morning, I was privileged to stand and watch Tony Blair and Jacques Chirac open the doors on the most amazing aircraft I'd ever seen in my life. It was the huge Airbus A380, and it is a monster. My mind slipped to the movie I had watched only 2 days earlier called The Aviator, which was about the life story of American businessman Howard Hughes. This Airbus was the first plane built that made his giant Spruce Goose flying boat of 1946 look small. In the A380, Airbus had built the world's largest ever aircraft capable of carrying over 800 people, although Virgin loyalists will be pleased to hear that our version will only carry 550, so there will finally be room for the double beds, gymnasium and casino that I have long wanted to put on long-haul flights. Unlike Howard Hughes, who never really had a market for his white elephant, I looked at the Airbus A380 with confidence. Knowing the history of the dirty tricks affair, readers will not be surprised to learn that most of these giant A380s are going to end up at Heathrow where, in 2005, BA still controlled nearly 50% of the landing slots, and where anyone who has had to sit stacked up waiting to land will know just how precious they are. In the summer of 2004, I also brought myself one step closer to my dream of using the strength of the brand and our people to change the world for the better by launching a new part of the group called Virgin Unite. This new organization was built by Virgin staff around the world and will be a vehicle to pull us all together, hopefully to make a difference with some of the tougher social challenges facing us. Holly volunteered to spend whatever time she had during her final year at medical school to help out with sexual health issues facing young people in the UK, right back to where I started some 40 years ago when I opened the Student Help Centre, which I'm happy to say is still providing free counselling on Portobello Road in West London. The run-up to the war and its aftermath did not hold back the Branson household. Holly had sailed through her A-levels and fulfilled her lifelong ambition to go to university to study medicine. She celebrated her 21st birthday, and our son Sam his 18th. Though Sam perhaps hasn't got the same sense of purpose at school as Holly had, he certainly knows how to party and knows how to enjoy life to its full. Joan and I were incredibly proud of how well Holly was getting on in her medical degree, so we decided to throw a big party for her 21st. The weather was beautiful in Kidlington in Oxfordshire that cold November night, and Holly looked lovely in her white evening gown. Joan and I had to pinch ourselves thinking back to the little baby girl, who we had brought back to our London houseboat in the Regent's Canal back in 1984. It was not many months later when Sam had his 18th, which was a considerably more lavish affair in the Roof Gardens in Kensington. To say that his friends' speeches were risque would be the understatement of the year. On this occasion, Joan and I had to put our fingers in our ears, rather than pinch ourselves. Our day in Toulouse with the Airbus A380 has since brought my mind back time and time again to Howard Hughes and that film, and has made me realize just how slim the line is between genius and insanity, and between determination and stubbornness. Yet again, I thank my lucky stars to have had the stability of a family around me during all the years of turmoil that Virgin has had to navigate without the balance sheet of a multinational corporation or the luxury of a cozy state monopoly. Poor old Howard Hughes didn't really have anyone he could turn to for honest advice, or the friends and family whose wit, charm, and wisdom can so often help all of us in life to keep our feet on the ground while we look at the stars. I have also taken a conscious decision to spend more time with my parents, in particular my father, Ted, who is the eldest. Though they are both well into their 80s, they are still on and off airplanes, traveling around the world. They have enormous affection for Africa, as do I, and in 1999 we bought a beautiful game reserve called Ulisaba in South Africa, where we've built a lovely house up on the hill looking over the jungle. We run this as a business, but make sure that we all find the time to go and visit it ourselves. These are the times that you remember and cherish. Over the previous decades, I had more and more come to appreciate Ted's wisdom. One example had been his very wise counsel about the war in Iraq, which he had also been vehemently against, but on which he had also reinforced my own views. That once the shooting started, we had to stand by and support the many brave young men and women from all the Allied countries who were following orders in Iraq. By the spring of 2004, Ted had fully recovered from a complex hip replacement operation a few years earlier, and I took a short sabbatical from the world of Virgin to go camping with him in the Serengeti. It is an awesome place where you can really feel that nature is still in charge of her destiny. Having been there, I can fully understand why so many anthropologists believe the region is where man originated as a species. We spent 10 days following the wildebeest migration and the predation of the lions upon their herds. For those of you who have not spent 10 days in a tent with your father, if you are fortunate enough to be in a position to do so, I can thoroughly recommend it in every way. I think we developed an even better understanding of each other as we talked long into the evening. More than anything, I marveled at the sense of humor of a man who had seen it all. One fantastic example of this was early one morning on his birthday. We'd all just woken up and were quite grumpy after a night in the tent, but Dad was beaming. We were all intrigued until he said, "If I was Catholic, I'd be doing penance today. I had the most wonderful dream. It involved a girl." "Did you misbehave with her?" I asked. Quick as a flash, Dad replied, "I don't know what you mean." "Well, I behaved. She was outrageously naughty." And this from a man in his 80s. There are many influences on my life that affect the way I feel about things. Ulisaba is one of them. Ulisaba means place of little fear, because it's a kind of rock citadel or watchtower rising out of the jungle, where the original warriors who lived there could make a stand when attacked by their enemies. To me, it is a place of great peace, where I can sit around a campfire at night with my friends and family, and listen to stories and make plans, just like the people of this ancient landscape have always done. I spend a lot of time in Africa, and have been fortunate enough to get out into the jungle. I think there is nothing more beautiful in the world than being out there and seeing the early morning sunrise. The air feels cleaner than anywhere else in the world, and you're completely in touch with nature. I remember one dawn when I was down in the river bed at Ulisaba, and for a long time watched 2 3-month-old lion cubs playing with their enormous mother. When she got tired of them, she picked them up in her teeth and went back into the thicket again. I marveled at how gentle she could be. We continued on foot, and soon saw the dominant leopard which has been in our game reserve for such a long time we've given her a name, Maquille. She was also playing with her young cubs as they ran up trees together, fell out of them, and chased each other in circles. Their agility, grace, and playfulness were astonishing. The first time I went to Ulisaba was when I was in South Africa to open a Virgin Atlantic route to Cape Town in 1999. At the time, I was looking for somewhere very special in the bush, and I was directed to the Sabi Sand region. As we drove, massive rocks emerged dramatically from the bush, pushed out by some ancient convulsion of the earth. Having chosen the area, we asked Mark Netherwood, a friend who used to run Necker Island, to work with us to create something dramatic and beautiful, yet unspoilt out of the jungle. There's nothing quite like Ulisaba in Africa. Rock Lodge is high on a rocky ridge with spectacular views of the jungle and game, while down in the riverbed is Safari Lodge, which has a wonderful Robinson Crusoe walkway through the trees to a dam where hippos and crocodiles wallow. There is so much game in this region of Africa, you're almost guaranteed to see most species without going very far. You can get up early in the morning or in the evening and go for a drive or even walk, and you'll always find things to see and marvel at. As I write this, I can see giraffes walking by and elephants in the distance. I have a particular affection for the elephants because they are so intelligent and playful. The young ones are just like children or teenagers. They love a tree called the marula, which bears a small red fruit that elephants find irresistible. Just this morning, I spent hours watching a young bull elephant shaking the tree to get at the fruit. They were falling like sweeties, just ready to be hoovered up. But at the point at which he got a carpet of them ready to eat, his brother came along and tried to sneak in. They ended up having the most almighty fight. The first young bull seemed to roar, "How dare you take my sweeties," just like any human being. Elephants will never damage their sweet shop, the marula tree, but their numbers are growing, and they do great damage to other trees. People want to have the elephants culled. We have tried to come up with an idea to help the elephants in order to avoid culling, and I noticed that nobody has actually replanted trees in the jungle. So partly, with our global warming hats on, partly to avoid the need to cull elephants, and partly to create jobs for Africans, we're setting up tree nurseries, and will work hard at getting trees replanted in the jungle. Many will be trampled or eaten by the elephants or giraffes, but some will survive. For the past 40 years, I have worked hard at developing Virgin as a major global business. On the way, along with some great successes, there have been many challenges, tempered by fun, and for a long time it seemed enough. But while I had always been aware of the need to be socially responsible, perhaps I am growing older and wiser because gradually, I feel I should do much more, on a far wider scale to help people. Setting up Virgin Unite was part of the process of my development as a social entrepreneur. One of my first trips with Virgin Unite was to South Africa with Brad Pitt. With HIV/AIDS at the top of our agenda, we took Brad to visit some of the hospitals in different townships and in very rural areas. When we arrived at one hospital, we saw that the walls were plastered with posters of competing undertakers. Inside, I was shocked when I saw hundreds of people who seemed to be almost resigning themselves to dying from HIV/AIDS. People were waiting in the corridors for the beds of the dozens who had died the night before. It was like a conveyor belt of death. There seemed no end to the suffering, because even the hospital workers appeared to accept the outcome as an inevitable part of Africa. The figures, which have been published for some years but often ignored, have always seemed too big to be comprehensible, which I think makes a lot of people switch off. It is too much to accept when you read that 15,000 people are dying every single day from HIV/AIDS, TB and malaria, most of them in sub-Saharan Africa. If this were happening in the UK or the US, we wouldn't allow it. I was outraged by this ridiculous situation. These diseases are treatable, yet they aren't being treated. Africa seemed to have so many insurmountable issues. How could they be turned around at a greater speed? We were rather subdued when I took Brad to meet with Nelson Mandela at his home to discuss the 46,664 AIDS campaign, in which Mandela used his prison number to call on South Africans not to allow AIDS patients to be reduced to statistics. It is easy to ignore statistics because you can get information fatigue when too many figures are thrown at you. A lighter moment was when I introduced Brad to Mandela by saying, "Brad Pitt's in film," and Mandela turned to Brad and said, with a twinkle, "Oh, what kind of film do you do?" Then, while Brad was posing next to Nelson Mandela for a picture, dressed in a 46664 t-shirt, someone said sotto voce, how lucky the former president was because so many young ladies would give their eye teeth to be sitting where he was. Deliberately misunderstanding, Brad grinned and replied, "So many young men as well." Later that day, we took Brad to meet Taddy Bletcher, a man who single-handedly started up TSIDA, Africa's first free university, in downtown Johannesburg. Taddy had started with nothing, but got the idea that, if he could be given an empty building, and if he could keep the costs down by asking the students to run the school and do all the cooking, the cleaning and the administration, and if he could get businesses to lend their top staff to come and do the lecturing, then he could offer students a fully accredited business degree at almost no cost. Most Africans had never had the chance to have this kind of education because they are all from very poor rural areas or townships. Poor children from the townships or rural communities have never stood a chance to get their feet on the first rung of the ladder, but 1,600 students a year are now being educated through TSIDA to degree standard for under $300 for the full course, including books and accommodation. I appreciated what Taddy was doing, and we soon started working in partnership with TSIDA, Love Life and Life College, 3 small social entrepreneur organizations, to build a graduate program called Women on the Move. This helps young women with peer education and mentoring. Once they are educated, they go back into their communities and find 30 other young people who they then have to mentor and educate. In this way, we have started to build an army of people across South Africa who are being educated. Part of the rationale behind it is that they will spread a serious message of health education, much needed in Africa. Many things had collided and come together during that trip to make me want to put more effort into working towards change, but it was the visits to the hospitals and overcrowded orphanages that had the most impact on me. I decided then to devote a more significant part of my time, about 50%, to social and environmental issues. I felt I had come a long way in my personal journey to Africa in the 5 years since I had found Elisaba. My African journey had been one of many miles and many experiences. Death has always been a part of the landscape, and while animals might stalk and kill each other in the jungle, there is no reason why so many Africans should die of preventable diseases. Some opportunities to help come out of nowhere. I was returning from Africa on Virgin Atlantic one day, and as always I strolled around, chatting to passengers. A lovely lady sitting in economy class met my eye and smiled. She invited me to sit next to her for a moment. Her name, she told me, was Marianne Hazelgrave, and she was the director of the Commonwealth Medical Trust. Little phases me, but even I didn't expect to be discussing fistulas with her. She spoke to me about fistula, which was the first time I'd even heard of it. Fistula happens, she told me, when very young girls, often as young as 12 and 13, as is the custom in some areas of countries such as Nigeria and Somalia, struggle to give birth without any assistance. A tear in the vagina wall, called a fistula, leads to permanent incontinence. Consequently, these young women are divorced by their husbands and shunned by their families. Thanks to good maternity care, the last case of fistula in the U.S. was in 1890, but it is still a common problem in Africa. Marianne has devoted her life to trying to help these girls. I knew I had to do something and asked Jean Elwang, who runs Virgin Unite, to look into it. Jean went to the United Nations Population Fund to see how we could help. This coincided neatly with Natalie Imbruglia, who is a good friend, coming to me and saying she wanted to do something to help young women. I invited her and Jean to lunch, and Natalie agreed to champion a campaign to promote the repairing of fistulas, because no one else of her stature was behind the issue. We took her out almost immediately to Ethiopia and Nigeria, so she could see the problems for herself. At the same time, I put some money in, and through the wonderful work and dedication of the team at the UNFPA, we did a fistula fortnight in Nigeria, where over a 2-week period 500 young women were repaired, and we upgraded the hospitals. Since then, Natalie has worked tirelessly for her adopted project, and I am proud of the way in which she rallied round when she was needed. The fact that she is a young, beautiful woman with an enormous talent, who is willing to help such an unfashionable issue, makes her a great role model. She also uses her music to promote fistula awareness and fundraising, and this gave us an idea to launch the music movement, which is a community of musicians willing and able to get involved with tough social issues. Natalie told me that seeing the young women firsthand was one of the saddest journeys she's been on. It is the worst thing that can happen to them. Many of them are just little girls, living as outcasts, shunned by the community. Some of them have lived in a hut at the back of their family house for 20 years or more. It is outrageous that this still happens when the problem can be repaired so easily. It could be avoided with more birth control and fewer girls marrying so young. But it is difficult for us to impose our views on other cultures. But at least we are allowed in to help make things better, and to provide education, and help improve the health infrastructure. I do try to be tactful, but sometimes you just have to speak your mind to make a point, as was the case when I went to speak to the U.S. Senate towards the end of 2005, as part of a project to develop a coalition on HIV/AIDS. On the way there in the taxi, Jean briefed me. There are some issues with the Bush government regarding condoms. They have committed a huge amount to HIV/AIDS, but they're unwilling to use it to buy condoms. I nodded. Yes, I see. So you might need to be a bit careful about how you speak about this at the Senate today, Jean continued. As soon as she said that, I smiled. It was slightly surreal to be in the amazing Senate House, with all its history, and to be discussing sex. Someone used the word grazing to describe how HIV could be spread by having sex with multiple partners, like it be going from flower to flower. One of the Republican senators reared to his feet and declared that people should abstain from sex. I stood up and said, "That's lovely, but it's not realistic. People are going to graze, but they should wear a condom when they graze." No glove, no love. I could feel Jean bring her hand up to her face to hide a wide grin. I was hopping into a van outside the Tsida campus one afternoon, having just met the wonderful Dalai Lama for the first time, when out of the blue, Taddy grabbed me on the pavement and said, "Hey, Richard, I've got a great idea. Why don't you start the Branson School for Entrepreneurship?" Taddy is an inspirational man, and when he speaks, you find yourself nodding in agreement. Inspired by his almost throwaway words in the street, I decided I would set up my first school. Tsida City campus already provides specialized accredited business administration degrees to disadvantaged students, and I resolved that Virgin Unite would work with Taddy to launch a separate school at Tsida to help young people start their own businesses. One of the first things we wanted to do was to raise a seed fund to be used as a kind of revolving loan for the students' enterprises. As soon as they started to make money, they would repay the loan, and in that way, the fund would continue to work for those who followed behind. My model for this was Muhammad Yunus, who for some 30 years had successfully been operating a microcredit system for some of the poorest people in the world through the Grameen Bank, known as the Poor Bank. He was first approached by a group of craftsmen in 1976, when he was a professor of economics in Bangladesh, to lend them $27 to start a business. He did so, fully confident that they would pay him back. As he said, "The poorest of the poor have a great sense of responsibility." He even lends to 55,000 beggars under a struggling members program. Professor Yunus's long-term vision is to eliminate poverty. So far, he has lent $1.5 billion to 3.5 million people, principally women, and has had very few defaulters. Virgin Atlantic sponsors the Sunday Times Fast Track Initiative, which brings top entrepreneurs together for dinner each year at my house in Oxford, to act as mentors to fledgling businesses. I auctioned off 2 spaces on our wake-up trips to Africa. 2 British entrepreneurs, Tom Bloxham and Leo Kaplan, bid £120,000 each to go with us. This launched the seed fund for our students' businesses to help start them off in the world. Most people cut ribbons or break bottles of champagne when launching something new. Instead, along with Tom and Leo, in October, I found myself taking my shoes and socks off and leaving my footprints in concrete at the entrance to the newly opened Branson School of Entrepreneurship. I felt quite emotional as I glanced at our footprints, which were supposed to inspire the students to walk in the footprints of global entrepreneurs. The first footprints of people were found in the clay of African shale beds. But to me, the more important thing was that this very building at 27 Harrison Street was where Nelson Mandela had worked as a young man before his long years of imprisonment. His autobiography, written after he was freed, was titled Long Walk to Freedom. The students would also have a long walk on their road to economic freedom against so many odds. Capitalism, which in its purest form is entrepreneurism, even among the poorest of the poor, does work, but those who make money from it should put back into society, not just sit on it as if they are hatching eggs. Every single person at the Branson School soon had an idea to fill in a gap here, to fill in a gap there. Any opportunity they soon realized is worth pursuing. Students will sell lollies, set up dealerships, be tour guides, open street cafes and restaurants, anything that will give them a leg up out of the townships and slums. I often pop in when I'm in South Africa, and I was both taken aback and moved once to find some of the kids had taken it upon themselves to fill in the holes in the road, and then stand by the side of the road and see if anyone would be good enough to pay them for filling in holes. It was a good example of capitalism at work. When Sam reached the age of 18 and left school, he thought he might take a gap year off and do some traveling. I thought it was a great idea and asked if I could tag along for a while. I'd been working pretty diligently since I was 15 years old, not wanting to let people down, and missed out on a gap year of my own. Fortunately, we're the kind of family who choose to go on holiday together, rather than separately, and Sam and I are very close, so it wasn't a matter of getting to know him, but of having some fun together. I had to be in Australia for some meetings, and afterwards we headed off down the coast to Byron Bay, the most easterly point of the Australian mainland. We stayed in a flat above Rays, an exotic little hotel, more Mediterranean Moroccan than Alice Springs, right on Watego's beach, and went for a walk along the Cape Byron Lighthouse track, which meanders through some fabulous rainforest. As the forest opened out onto the headland, we saw a manta ray idly cruising along and a small school of sharks. In the small town of Byron itself, large groups of hippies roamed the wooden Western-style sidewalks. There were more head shops and bongo drum shops than in San Francisco, and the haze of marijuana hung heavy in the air, like a time warp back into the summer of love. The first morning, we were up early and ran down to the beach with a couple of surfboards to catch a few waves. Sam and his friends were old hands, but I had never surfed before. I could kite surf and thought that surfing would not be hard. You just waited for a wave, climbed up on a board, and it would carry you along to shore. The first day, I couldn't get up. The second day, I couldn't get up. My mind idly remembered the sharks out there beyond the headland. "It's easy. Look, you do this, Richard." Sam's suntan friends chortled as they cruised by on a long, curling wave. I was determined to crack it, but was still struggling on the third day when someone on the board next to me said, "Hey, Richard, two guys are hiding in the bushes over there with telephoto lenses." Instantly, ego got the better of me, and on the next wave, I got up, balanced like an old pro, and sailed smoothly in. It was like riding a bicycle. You struggle and struggle, then suddenly you're off and never look back. It was a perfect day, one of the very few times in my life when nothing seemed that important. I didn't make phone calls, didn't think about a thing. I was out on the waves with not a care in the world. Such days are rare, and all the more precious for that. I remember when Holly was about 5, the two of us went off for a week down to the fishing village of Bantham, in Devon, without Joan. It was a special week for both of us. Several years after successfully surfing that day, Sam and I drove 60 miles up into the mountains together, goofing around, saying silly things, cracking bad jokes and laughing, more like two best friends than father and son. We were so exuberantly happy, we didn't want the day to end.
Thank you for listening to The Book Reader. Stay tuned for the next episode tomorrow. Please subscribe for updates.